This game was offered to me on my Curator Connect on Steam. It's a racing game made by Smartly Gophered Games in Unreal Engine 5. I really need to do more Steam page reading before I start, because it's still in early access. I didn't quite realise until shortly in, so this is going to be more of a constructive criticism exercise than a game review, considering the game is still pretty early in its early access. I will say I had a bit of fun playing this game, but more in a sandbox way than a racing game. That was when I could actually get onto it. To start playing, I had to download a thing from the internet on .net, which reassured me it was an open source developer platform and the download wouldn't melt my computer hardware like an ice cream in the sun. I then installed it and launched it from Steam, showing the launcher which crashed the second I pressed to play, showed me a window telling me to update my graphics card, which I ignored, and then promptly launched itself anyway. This happened every single time I loaded the game, which was nice, and then I got to see the main menu. It was pretty simple, with just a 2 at the top and options for single player, multiplayer and settings, plus a link to the game's Steam store page. The settings were a bit more in depth, with difficulty levels, gun switch, which you couldn't use in the version I had because there were no guns, a HUD on or off option, and a hints section. It showed the mouse controls, which was WASD, P to change your vehicle colour, R to reset, and escape to pause. There are volume sliders, your resolution settings, advanced video settings, and then developer mode and debug info, which are both blocked to you as you're not a developer. I then went to play. There are 3 levels of different size, which are not in size nor alphabetical order in the menu. Sorry, organised people. So I chose the small level first, then the medium, then the large. I'm going to break it down from here into areas for improvement, because that's going to be the easiest way to work through it. First of all, driving feel. You want your car to feel like a car, and to give it credit, it does for the most part. I found out on the large level that there's a handbrake kind of option with space, but your car has no active brake lights, so it doesn't really feel genuine. It's more of a back left forward right kind of thing. The turn kicks in quickly but with a delay, so you tap right and it doesn't really move, and then you hold right and then you're doing donuts. A bit more response off the bat might be better for those minor turn adjustments and some actual functional lights. At the moment, headlights are manual, if you can find the button for them that you don't get told about, but they could be automatic to take some of the focus off switching them on and onto the driving. Saying that, the driving isn't too challenging that your capacity is too far stretched to switch on headlights. Secondly, realism. There are a lot of things that can help the realistic feel for a game like this, and there are a lot of shortfalls, starting with the fact that you're a ghost and are controlling the vehicle with sentient mind powers. Or perhaps you are the car, Pickup McQueen about to do a lap in the Aussie outback. There's no sound effect for the vehicle if it crashes into anything, it's just a silent stop. Plus there are invisible walls at points where you just finish the track and slam into a force field. The vehicle takes no visible damage from crashes either, just bounces around, and there's no change in sound effects when you drive on tarmac versus off-road. Najarovic, don't shoot me if I said that wrong, is the large level, and that has some added detail in, such as road signs, but that's kind of redundant when you have a right turn sign directly before a left turn, or no turn at all, or a roundabout sign that doesn't lead up to a roundabout. There's not much point having them in there for detail if that detail is going to draw people's attention to the fact it isn't right. There's no effect when driving on sand in the beach level, neither drag nor an effect to show that you're kicking up sand as you would, and you look a bit like you're just floating across it as there's also no tracks or anything left in it. The sand also gets wet inside the cave when it rains despite being sheltered, and your camera gets wet too. There is some good attention to realism though in the game in parts. The weather does change the ground texture and leaves it wet, and there are effects on the camera. The car model is really good with the little dinks in it to make it look real, and the inside is fleshed out too. The bushes are so-so, could be more realistic and could be in any way influenced by the car instead of completely unmoving when you go past, but they're passable enough. The sound effects for the vehicle are good enough, but there is a sound effect for driving on wet floor which is still the same on tarmac, so when you're driving in the rain I hope you like the sound of moist. Third thing's the environment. The environments are different but a little odd. The first is just one road through a bunch of trees, dry ground and bushes, which looks alright, but it also refuses to entirely load in, so you reach points where no matter how high your detection distance is, you get absolutely nothing and then a bunch of new foliage spawns. I'm not sure if it's set to load in two halves, but that's kind of what it looks like. The other two levels are better loaded in, but the medium level, Turtle Coast, is very barren apart from a rock formation and a little wooden structure. The cave and rocks look good, but otherwise there's not really too much to look at. The skyboxes are all good, and the rain sound effects and textures are good. However, whilst I do appreciate your eagerness to show off all your hard work, it does mean that around 12 to 20 seconds into every level you play, you'll be hit with a total eclipse or a rain shower. The game says it has a day and night cycle, but it's more of a winter day in the northern hemisphere where you get 10 minutes of sun before being plunged into darkness kind of cycle. Turtle Coast could do with an actual track and maybe a bit more in terms of desert foliage and trees and stuff, or even more rocks just to avoid it being a flat open sand area. There are birds in the rural Australia level too, but as those are above your head, they're not easy to spot. The Steam page says the game aims to have environment affect driving, i.e. wet mud equals slower movement. I didn't notice that too far from what I saw, though I did join a multiplayer game where it was already deeply raining and could barely get more than a mile an hour, though that could easily have been lag. 4 is stability. The game has some moves to make to stabilise, starting with the fact the launcher crashes every time even after the Nvidia update, and ending with the fact that I couldn't play the large level for more than 10 minutes without it crashing. It took 4 times where I went down the roads to explore the map and got a fatality on the game. I also got a crash on the first level whilst doing pretty much nothing, and some FPS drops with increases in visual quality, or when the weather started kicking in, or at other random times. It wasn't massive on the FPS anyway, but you're talking a drop to around 12 FPS at times like that. My computer has above the minimum requirements and above or equal to the recommended requirements, so you can't blame it on the crap top. 5 is controller input. The controller input was actually more usable than I thought it would be, despite the game not wanting to show me any of the controls for it, and there don't seem to be any brakes. All I could do was forward, turn and reverse, as there also seemed to be no headlight button. You can jump straight to mouse and keyboard, or use keyboard commands even with a controller on, so maybe they thought people would just do that instead, but it makes the controller kind of pointless in that case. 6 is flaws. Welcome to the pseudo-bug report. If you ever playtest a game, this is usually the part you have the most fun going through, looking for bugs and exploits. And yes, I've found sort of a few in this one. First of all, a simple one. When you go into the menu and select the HUD and the hints, they don't work. If you go out the menu and go back into it, they'll be selected, but if you load up a game and then come back out and go into the menu, they'll be deselected again. I don't know if that's because neither have been implemented yet, that could be the case, but either way they're trick options because you can't choose them. Secondly, upping the graphics breaks the vehicle graphics and replaces it with this beautiful matte grey checkerboard. Any setting above medium does this, be it high or cinematic, and also too high settings remove part of the rock from existence in Turtle Coast as well until you get much closer. In general, the graphics looked a bit blurrier, so I'm not sure if this has been configured yet either. Maybe not a bug, but you can clip the camera through the ground, and also on Turtle Cove you can get yourself underneath the rock where you're not meant to by driving into the water at a set point where the invisible wall doesn't exist and coming out of it at another set point onto a specific bit of beach. There is a planned cave inside the rock, but the other side is solid, unless you sneak in this way. It still rains underwater for some reason, and your car is completely unaffected by being under the sea. My controller play button mashing to find the headlights introduced me to the reset button. Now, in some places the reset button is completely useless and just puts you back in the bad spot that you were already in. But what I also realised is that the reset button lifts you a bit as you respawn, but that lift is just set vertical distance from you and not from the ground. That means that if you spam respawn, you can fly. Of course, being committed as I am, I tried to get myself out of the skybox. It's a long way up, but luckily you can't get yourself out of the map vertically, and since you can't move forward or backward in the air, you can't really use it to fly over obstacles or anything. What you do end up doing is dropping out of the sky and bouncing at the bottom. When I did this on the rural Australia level, I ended up Beyblading my car into a tree and getting it stuck. Reset got it stuck again in a different way, and then reset again finally got it out. So it's not the best in the world, but if you use it enough, it will help you out eventually. Though be careful to have nothing over your head, as it'll just stop you from climbing up if you spam. I also found a method to get myself up to speeds of 590 miles per hour, and in reverse no less. How did I do this? Well, by driving off the edge of the Turtle Coast map and plummeting into the abyss. And yes, apparently I was in reverse by going forward. Don't ask me how. 7 is the selling points. It's harsh to judge the selling point matchup of the game at this point because it's not done yet, but the Steam store has a lot of things written on it which at the moment aren't true. The vehicle customization lets you change colour, but also type of vehicle. This is a lie, there's only one type implemented at the moment, so it's pickup or nothing. It also says it's a 3D racing game, but I can give it 66% for 3D and game because there's no racing mechanics even implemented at the moment. You have a number on your head which I assumed was a position indicator, but even that doesn't work since I went onto an online game which shockingly actually had someone on it, and we both had ones. Also, there's no start or finish lines, and Turtle Coast's only mechanic is a gem you can pick up into your truck and drop off in a cave, so is that the race? Race to drop off the gem, perhaps? It also mentioned something about maps for off-roading, but I wouldn't recommend that because you'll be doing a lot of 20-point turns on rural Australia. It took me 10 seconds to get my car trapped in a farmer's field ditch in the larger level, and there isn't really any off-road in Turtle Coast. When everything is off-road, nothing is. There are features dangled as yet to come, such as the dedicated online servers, more vehicles and customization, challenges for the player, credits that don't exist yet, all and team options in the text chat which might indicate team play in future. But to be honest, whilst it's a nice idea to have feature ideas in mind, it's probably better to get the basics right first. Most likely starting with putting an actual race into your racing game. There are no leaderboards, there's a timer, but it's pointless with no start and end point. The game is very fresh, it's been out since January 3rd, so it's still in infancy, which does make me question the choice to put it out to curators this early, since actually on the Steam store it has mostly negative reviews and they've kind of set themselves up for a bad look already. It's been released to early access without the actual game mechanics being in it. Yeah, you can drive, but there's not one race in the racing game yet, it's pretty much just a driving sandbox. It's a good start, the assets are decent, and the maps aren't too bad. The rural Australia one is maybe a bit small or could be diversified a bit. Turtle Coast doesn't really have a track, and the large map is a big enough map, but it hates too much exploration and the roads don't seem to link coherently. Overall, the foundations are there. There's just a chunk of polish that's needed, and also the key game mode isn't really there. I got about an hour and a half out of trying and testing the modes and qualities. I imagine when it actually properly releases as a game, it would have a lot more potential than that. I'm not going to lay a judgment on numbers because at the moment it's pretty much a mat of potential and not a lot more. I don't know enough about the development process to know if there's been much playtesting before this point, but I guess the point of early access is to get that feedback now. So, you have mine here. If you want to give the developer some feedback thus far on their game, I'm sure they're welcome to it with it being early access, but otherwise if you're wanting gameplay, there's sadly not too much on offer at the moment.